Hello there, welcome back to the channel. In this video I'm going to be looking at something I've been waiting to get my hands on for quite some time. Now I did have an order in for this with a different supplier, but there'd been a few delays and things like that and it never come through. So I actually ordered this through a different supplier last week, and to be fair, they were really quick and got it out to me pretty much within a couple of days basically. So we have here the Pixhawk 2. I should really explain a little bit actually. Now I'll confess I am not the world's largest expert on Pixhawk, Ardupilot, PX4, far from it. I have a basic understanding of what it is, how it works, and the software side of it, because it is a little bit complicated with the naming and things like this. But what we have here is the Pixhawk 2, really known as the Pixhawk 2.1, which is the latest generation of standalone flight controller to carry that name, really. There was a Pixhawk 2 which was used in the 3DR Solo. Now that was the first version of this, but it was never sold as a standalone product. It was only ever the flight controller that was put into the Solo drone itself. This is the standalone version, which is a partnership with the guys who developed the Pixhawk and Pixhawk 2 and a company called HEX. And the HEX are the company who are manufacturing it, basically. So yeah, what we have here is the Intel Edison and HEX GNSS kit. So this is a kit that allows you to also put in the Intel Edison companion computer. There are two versions of the Pixhawk 2 available. There's the version that accepts the companion computer, and there's the version that doesn't. Just to explain that a bit further, because it gets a bit more complicated, the flight controller itself is identical, it's just the carrier board, but we'll get into that a bit more in a minute. So anyway, what I'm going to do first of all is just go through the unboxing of it, have a look at what comes in the box, especially this package specifically, because this is the one I've got. So obviously we have our box, and this comes as a complete kit. So it is the Pixhawk 2 flight controller, it is the carrier board that accepts the Intel Edison, and it is the HEX GPS as well. So to get started, when you open the box, you get this nice little card on top actually, which shows you as following. So it's got the names of the companies. So obviously you've got HEX, who is my understanding is they're the current manufacturer of the hardware. You've got ProfiCNC, those are the guys who did the original designing of the hardware, basically, or were involved in the designing of the hardware. It's obviously open source. You've got the PX4 Autopilot logo and the Ardupilot logo as well. Now that is the software side of it, the bottom two there, which I'll come on to a little bit more later. The card just said it's the world's most advanced autopilot for open autonomous unmanned vehicles, redundant, temperature controlled and isolated. Yeah, so that's the nice little card. And then in the box we have this. Now I'm not sure how well this is going to come out because it's all black. It's actually quite hard to see because the GPS is black and the flight controller is black. So there's a lot of black here. Let me just get it a bit closer, especially on a white background. There you go, you can see. Now this is what you can see here is the cube. Now there's a bit of a name change going on with the Pixhawk 2 and cube. I'll come on to that a little bit in a minute, but it is the Pixhawk 2 known as the cube basically, and we've got the HEX GPS. So if we get it out, and what you got is you get that out as a pair, which is the flight controller and the GPS, and then we've got everything else that comes in the box. So looking at the flight controller and GPS, okay, so we've got the Pixhawk 2 and the HEX GPS. They've built a nice M8N GPS system to go with the Pixhawk 2, and the guys at HEX are distributing that as well. The big cool thing about it, and the part I actually like, is it includes the button, the arm button, as part of the GPS. So it actually has the status LED lights and the arm button as part of the GPS. So that's actually quite a nice touch. as we can see, as part of the Pixhawk 2, one of the big changes is the move over to new connections. I've had a Pixhawk 1. It wasn't my favourite flight controller. I had a number of issues with it. Some of that was for varying reasons. One of the things I really hated about it was the horrible, horrible connection that was used. I can't stress how much I disliked it. However, they've moved over now to a whole new connection which actually latches in and out, so it will connect in and out quite easily. So if you are adjusting your quads, it's quite easy to do. So the latch in is just like that. You press the button and it latches out. So that is 10 times better. So that's the GPS module itself. It is an MAN, my understanding is, so it does support all the usual sat-navs, GLONASS, GPS. Any real complaint, just looking at it, and this is the first time I've stretched it out, is I would have liked that cable to have been a bit longer. One other thing, it should just be long enough, but if you are putting your GPS up on the mast, it might mean you might need to extend it, that's all. But one of the things I've noticed with a lot of the GPS is the cables are short. Obviously that is done for a reason, but it would have been nice to have had a bit of extra length on it. But no, that's it. Overall, I'm actually really impressed with the GPS. It's a nice, solid, large looking unit. So moving over to the Pixhawk 2 itself. Now, for those of you who don't understand the difference between the Pixhawk 1 and the Pixhawk 2, the Pixhawk 2 is a step forward on the hardware. So there are changes. They've upgraded the sensors. They've made some changes to the inputs, the outputs. Pixhawk, I should say, always did consist of two separate parts, which is the main flight controller and what they call the FMU. Which is the I/O board. So you've got the board that takes all the connections, and then the main flight controller itself. What they have actually done with the Pixhawk 2 is taken that a step further and separated them off into two separate entities. So the flight controller, which is the big cube on the top, hence the reason it's known as the cube, is the flight controller. And then the carrier board at the bottom is the I/O board with everything on. So the connections, the fittings and everything like that. So it is a step in, for me actually, it's an interesting step, because what it does mean is the cube could be potentially mounted to custom base plates as part of quad frames. So if a manufacturer wanted to make their frame with the connection and the I/O built in, they could, and all you would have to do is just drop your cube in place. So it has potential for some very, very interesting developments. Otherwise, if you want to use it for normal, standard use, you would pick it up with the I/O. Now, when you buy it in this kit, the cube is already mounted to the carrier board. I didn't have to do this. This is how it comes. Looking at the I/O, what we've got is a lot of connections, really. If we look around it, you've got your headers on the side here, which is for your main outputs, your auxiliary outputs. Your RC in is at the bottom down here. You've got your S-bus. You've then got power 1 and power 2. So the Pixhawk supports redundancy on power. So it allows you to have two power inputs, so if one should fail, it will switch over to the second one. There's quite a lot around that, which is worth reading into before you do it, because there's actually three methods if you want to go down that road with USB as well. But basically you do have the option of redundancy on power. Spinning it round to the other side, we have our input ports. So input and output ports, I should say. So we've got GPS 1 and GPS 2. So it allows you to hook up two GPS modules. You've got your TEL-M2 port, your I2C port, which is a communications port, your external USB port. So if you didn't want to use the USB on the side of the flight controller, so if you were burying it inside your frame, you could hook up an external USB port and it would go to that one there. You've got your TEL-M1 port, which is your telemetry port, which is for things like the two-way radios. And you've got your analog digital port, as well. And you've got CAN 1 and CAN 2. So these are CAN network ports for hooking up to other peripherals as well. So that's a nice addition. Looking around on the side of the cube, you've got your main USB port, which communicates with the cube. Below that is your SD card, which you can just see in there. Not sure if you can quite see it, but it is located just down there below the USB port. And then rotating the unit around the other side, you have 2 additional USB ports. Now, these are specifically for the Edison use, the Intel Edison companion computer. So this version of the flight controller allows you to plug in the miniature Intel Edison companion computer module into the bottom. It goes in the bottom under here. I'll have a look at that a bit closer now after. But what you have here is your USB debug ports and your standard USB port, really, the sort of communications port for the Edison as well. So those what those 2 USB ports are for. They do not communicate with the flight controller itself. Your main USB for your flight controller is the one on the side. Overall, looking at it, the cube itself is actually metal. It's not plastic. You feel it and you think, oh, what's that? But it's actually metal. So it's a nice touch. The unit itself is plastic. It is larger than a standard flight controller if you're used to anything like a NASA or any of the clones that are out there. The base of it is about on par with the standard Pixhawk. It's just a lot taller, obviously, because of the cube, so it is something to take into account when you're going to be mounting it in a frame. You're going to want a lot more height. The advantage, though, is, unlike you had on the Pixhawk, which was one of my bugbears, is with the top connections on the Pixhawk, you had the wiring coming out left, right and centre, which you still do with this, but you've now got the cube at the top. So the wiring, if you can do it tidily, will actually, you've sort of got your height there already, so you have got space either side for it. What I used to find with the Pixhawk was with the large bundle of wiring, it would move it around. Now, the reason for that was quite simple, and that's one of the big improvements on the Pixhawk 2, is the Pixhawk 2 is internally isolated. So if we go back to the little card, there was redundant, temperature controlled, isolated. What they mean by this is it has an internal isolated heated IMU, basically. There's a bit more to it than that, but the internal sensors are dampened internally. So when mounting the Pixhawk 2 in normal conditions, there is no reason to soft mount it. Ideally, you should hard mount it to your frame. It does not require the use of the foams like you had before on the Pixhawk 1. It doesn't require the use of an isolation board in normal circumstances. Obviously, there will always be frame types where you have huge amounts of vibrations, but really on something like this, the solution to the vibrations is not soft mounting the flight controller, it's actually fixing the vibrations. In fact, soft mounting of this flight controller could give you worse performance, not better. Okay, so let's pop him back in there and continue to have a look in the box a minute. What else have we got? So we have an included power module. So the Pixhawk doesn't have an internal PMU or power distribution board or module. It requires a power input externally. They do include what they call this little mini power brick, which is really a nice unit. However, it is a bit limited. It does support up to 8S batteries. However, it only supports up to 30 amp. So that is quite a low current rating. So if you are using anything, you need to make sure that your motor current draw is not over 30 amp if you use the stock power module. However, there are some very, very good options out there which are worth considering. I'm going to just grab mine because I put them over here. And those are these, which is the Maunch. I think it's Maunch. I don't actually know how to pronounce this. I'm going to say Maunch or March, M-A-U-C-H. Not sure how we pronounce that, but this is the March. This part here is the current sensor. Then we have the case for the current sensor. We have a cable which supports a Pixhawk 2, and we then have a BEC. The reason there is a BEC is the Maunch system current sensor does not support built-in voltage supply. It requires an external power supply as well. So it's a two-part system. You have the BEC, which is a really high precision BAC. These come very, very highly recommended. This is the 2 to 6S version, which is 5.35 volt and 3 amp. So that supplies 3 amp, and that is only to supply power to the flight controller. That's all that is to do. Then you have the current sensor. This is 2 to 6S, but it is 100 amp. So it will support up to 100 amp. It comes pre-wired with 2 wires on either side. Actually, I haven't opened these yet. That's how new they are. Let's get it out. In there you've got some sticky tape, you got the things, but there it is. There it is. So that is the current sensor. And these, as I said, it's 100 amp up to 6S. These units really, really do come very highly recommended if you're using a Pixhawk system. In fact, if you're using any system you need a current sensor, they do come highly recommended. But the only thing to remember with them is the current sensor doesn't include a stable power supply, so you have to use an external BEC. You don't have to use their own, but I would strongly recommend it. I really would. As for cost of these, the BEC I think was 15 quid in the UK. The current sensor was 22. So it's not silly money, but it's worth picking up. And obviously then you have the cable which converts to the Pixhawk 2, which means that will plug straight in from there to there, and they include that with it. So you do have your internal power brick. What this does allow you to do, that if you buy that external one, you could actually use this as the backup power one for second power if you wanted to. I haven't looked too deeply into doing it yet, but there is absolutely no reason why you could not use the included mini power brick as part of your backup power supply unit. It's a possibility. It's a possibility. So you get the nice little power brick. Before we look at the wiring, you also get some foam pads, lots of 3M foam pads. Some for the flight controller, some for the GPS. These are the ones for the GPS. You also get the little manual for the here GPS unit. There's not a lot to do on that. It is really straightforward. It literally is just plug the connector straight into the GPS 1 port, or if you're doing 2 of them, plug one into GPS 1 and one into GPS 2. You will need a different cable though for GPS 2. The reason being is the GPS 1 port also includes the connections for the arming switch. So if you are going to use a second here GPS, you will need to change this cable over, and it can be swapped over. It just unclips and comes off. And there's a GPS 2 cable which you can purchase. I've actually got one. It's 4 quid. And it will allow you to plug it into the GPS 2 port. But that is the reason why the 2 ports are different sizes. The GPS 1 port has the built-in connections for the arming switch as standard. You have a nice little card in there which tells you about Pixhawk 2. You have some mounting screws. Again, as I was saying, hard mounting is a preferred option on this flight controller if you're going to put it on a standard frame. You have a little quick start guide which tells you about mounting it. And then you got the I2C bus extension. So if you wanted to add additional sensors through I2C, you can do it through that way. The cable set is quite extensive, actually, when you look at the cable set. What they include as standard is a nice flat USB cable. We've probably all got millions of them, but it's nice to have another one. The buzzer. All of the wires are actually labelled up, so if we look on that, they've actually labelled it buzzer. That's actually quite a nice little touch. So that's the buzzer wiring. Now, with this, there was one thing that confused me when I first got it, because I'm looking going, buzzer. Okay, so we've got GPS 1, I2C, USB, GPS 2, TELM1, ADC, TELM2, CAN 1. Where does the buzzer go? And I had a look over it, and I couldn't find it anywhere. It turns out the buzzer goes into the USB port. If you read the instructions, it'll tell you that. But it is something that does confuse you when you first look at it, but yeah, the buzzer goes into the USB port, basically. Other cables included is a GPS conversion wire. So if you have a Pixhawk 1 or standard GPS module, so you're not using the HEX GPS module, they include an arming button wired in with a GPS cable. So the cable would go into the Pixhawk. 2, you've got the arming button, similar to what you used to have before. And then you've got 2 separate cables, GPS and GPS 1. So these are 2 different connection cables depending on what GPS you have, basically. So you've got power and one for compass. So if you were using a standard GPS or you were using another GPS that didn't have the built-in arming button that you've got on there, so again, as I said, you've got the little built-in arm button. Might be quite hard to see, but it's there. You can use this cable, but under normal circumstances with the HEX GPS, you don't need to use it. Also included is an I2C cable, so that would go from the I2C port to the little board that they've included with it. So you would just connect him onto him like that, and that would just go into the I2C port. Nice and easy, nice and straightforward. They've included 2 telemetry cables, so Telem 1 and Telem 2, I think it is. There it is. So you've got 2 telemetry cables, so if you're using 3DR radios, which I do have actually at the garage, so they will be brilliant. You won't need to rewire. You can literally just plug into the Telem port and plug straight into the Pixhawk 2. So nice little touch. GPS 2 cable. So they've included a standard cable which will go into the GPS 2 port, which you could use again with a third-party GPS. This cable is not the one though to use if you've got a second HEX GPS. You would use a different cable if you were going to do that, which is available. This is purely if you're going to use external power cables. Sorry, external GPS. Finally, you've got 2 power cables, so power cable 1 and power cable 2. So they've included a very basic power cable. So this is the one that would connect up to the power module included with it. I believe, actually, no, sorry. This is the one that connects up to that. So the one that's labeled power 2. There we go. So power 2 cable, and then that would go into the power port on the Pixhawk 2, yeah, like that. So that's if you were going to use this module, but also if you wanted to use this as your secondary, you could just pop it over into the power 2 cable. And then they've included another cable. This really is more like the one that was on the original power module that is available for a lot of the original Pixhawks with the traditional connector, the one I hated, to be honest. But yeah, so that's the included cables, included in the box. What I am going to do now, we have gone through this, I'm going to pull the bottom off and go and have a look at the connection port for the Intel Edison. So to do that, what you actually have to do is take the bottom off the flight controller. Now there are a couple of screws to do this. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, and you've also got 1, 2, 3, 4. The reason you also need to pull the bottom ones out is if you just take the side ones out, it will actually take the whole flight controller out, but the carrier board remains attached to the bottom plate. To remove the bottom plate, you actually have to remove the 4 on the sides and these 4. Hold the cube and the bottom will come off. So we'll go and have a look at that. Okay, so I've removed the screws from the sides and the 4 from the bottom. And what you can then do is by gently removing the base plate, and you can see then the underneath of the carrier board. So what we have is our battery backup over on the right hand side here. You've got 2 screws with the long connector. That is where the Intel Edison will connect. So you would remove the 2 screws, connect the Intel Edison in, making sure that the long connector is in solid, and then tighten back down. You've obviously got your 2 USB ports up here, which are for your Edison, your debug and your connection. You've also at the bottom got 2 connectors as part of the baseboard which don't break through to the side, so they're not for general use, they're for debugging of the baseboard itself. And interestingly, if I just pop it up, there are actually 3 little buttons on the bottom corner there. 1, 2, 3. Now, I don't know what these do. I'm assuming they're resets, actually. I'm going to actually have a dig in and figure it out what they actually are. But they're not labelled. Well, they are labelled, but they're very, very small writing, so I can't actually see what it says with my eyesight. And overall, that's the inside of the Edison edition of the Pixhawk 2.1.